Rachel Maddow put out a very bizarre segment where she called for the national news media to stop televising the daily presidential briefings about the coronavirus.
Should stop broadcasting it. Honestly, it's going to cost lives.
This is a briefing in an emergency time where the president updates the country on important details about the coronavirus, safety measures to help unite the country. And this is common that presidents will do this when there's a threat. But Rachel Maddow doesn't want this televised. She goes through a 4-minute long commentary on all the quote-unquote lies Trump has said at these conferences. And based on that, she says we need to stop. This case she's presenting is so thin, and I'm going to go through each one of these examples that she gives. So let's just start at the very beginning.
I know we ought to be getting used to this kind of thing by now, but I'm not.
So dramatic.
This has been prescribed for many years for people to combat malaria, which was a big problem, and it's very effective. It's a strong drug. So we'll see.
It's fairly effective against SARS.
It was, as I understand that, is that a correct statement? It was fairly effective on SARS.
John, you've got to be careful when you say fairly effective. It was never done in a clinical trial. They compared it to anything.
You've got to be very careful when you say fairly effective.
So this is her first one, and I'm not even sure what point she's trying to make, because Trump says fairly effective. When I first watched this, it seemed like Trump was saying it's fairly effective. But if you watch it, this reporter in the audience, he's saying this malaria drug has been fairly effective at treating coronavirus. That's what the reporter says.
So we'll see.
Fairly effective against SARS.
It was, as I understand that, is that a correct statement? It was fairly effective on SARS.
John, you've got to be careful when you say fairly effective. It was never done in a clinical trial.
And Trump says it's been fairly effective, repeating it. And then Trump asks the doctor, it's been fairly effective. What do you think about that? And the doctor says, well, I wouldn't say go that far because it's only had limited trials. So I'd be very careful. And then she's like huffing and puffing over it.
President Trump today, again, just flat out wrong in public about this malaria drug that has gotten stuck in his mind.
It's been stuck in his mind. Why is she so upset about it? It could be a cure. This could save thousands, tens of thousands of people's lives, maybe millions of people's lives throughout the world. And it's stuck in his mind. Instead, she wants to focus on a phrase, fairly effective, that Trump didn't even say in this clip. He was asking the doc, do you think it's fairly effective?
Yesterday, President Trump proclaimed that that drug had been approved as a coronavirus treatment and would be available almost immediately for use. Within moments, the FDA had to clean that up because that is not true at all. It is not at all approved for coronavirus treatment.
She got this one wrong, too. I went back and I watched the whole news conference. I'll put the link in the description, but it was very informative about the FDA and the Trump administration is doing to try to push for new therapies and experimental therapies. And the FDA has been very lenient and been working with the government to approve things in a much faster time than normal because this is an emergency situation. We can't wait months or years for approval of things when people's lives are on the line. And this is what Trump was talking about. Trump wasn't saying chloroquine has been approved by the FDA for coronavirus use. He was saying it's been approved for compassionate use. That is, when doctors see a patient who's in a bad situation and the patient wants to try this experimental drug, they can. It's like right to try. And they were able to approve this because, one, it's an emergency situation, but two, we know this drug is already safe. It's been used for 80 years on malaria, so we know this drug is not going to be killing people, unlike other experimental drugs that have not been tried at all. So that's what helped make this a little bit easier to get it approved for compassionate use. They have a process where the doctor will call up the FDA somehow, and the FDA director said it will be very quickly approved or decided on, and which means probably approved. I mean, if the patient's willing, if the doctor's willing, I can't imagine why it wouldn't be approved. So that's what Trump meant, and that's what the doctor even says, because Trump spoke for 10 minutes, and Trump said it's been approved, it's going to be immediately available, and then the doctor started talking about compassionate use, and the doctor said that's what Trump meant. And here's what the doctor said.
At the same time, we're also working through different mechanisms to actually get drugs into the hands of providers and patients. The president mentioned this, but one of the mechanisms is called compassionate use. Let me just tell you about this. If there's an experimental drug that's potentially available, a doctor could ask for that drug to be used in a patient. We have criteria for that and very speedy approval for that. The important thing about compassionate use, and that's what the president meant, this is even beyond right to try.
Rachel Maddow said Trump is wrong for saying it was approved by the FDA. Well, it hasn't been approved for coronavirus treatment in general. It has been approved for compassionate use, which is what Trump meant. So this is two that Rachel got wrong. I don't know who's fact-checking for Rachel Maddow's show, but they missed this one. So that's two that they misinterpreted. That's her first two.
In the weeks leading up to now, we have repeatedly heard claims from the president that the virus was well contained, that it was well under control, that it was going to disappear. Remember that? Like a miracle, he said it was going to disappear.
Well, this is one criticism that is at least partially valid. Yes, Trump did downplay the coronavirus in the first few weeks. It's proven that he was incorrect. But to put it in context, nobody was talking about the coronavirus. In fact, Washington Post wrote an article. Let me read this headline. Get a grip, America. The flu is a much bigger threat than the coronavirus. Okay, they're downplaying it. And the World Health Organization on January 14th, no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus. So they're downplaying it. This is not, hindsight is 20/20 here. You have a situation where there's people downplaying it. World Health Organization and Washington Post is downplaying it. China is downplaying it. They're hiding information. What I think happened was Trump looked at it. He looked at some of the people downplaying it. And then we think about so many other viruses that were supposed to be so huge and were hyped in the past, like MERS and Ebola and all these other things. Seems like every year or two something comes up and then nothing comes of it. And I remember Ebola, I think in 2014, it sunk the stock market for a few days or a few weeks. And it's totally unnecessary. Ebola was nothing, basically nothing. So Trump's hearing all the people downplay it. He knows the history of all these times viruses popped up and were hyped and then turned out to be almost nothing. So he's downplaying it too. He's like, this is going to be just like all the other times. He didn't know that. That's what he expected based on past experiences. And Rachel Maddow didn't know that either, by the way. She was talking about the phony impeachment. She was not talking about this. Only in hindsight now does she act like, oh, why didn't you know? I only started to seriously think about this when Mike Cernovich started to tweet about it. And he was saying, you know what, guys, I'm hearing things from people with China supply lines. They're saying this is a lot bigger deal than people think. And he was talking about it, and I started to realize, okay, this might be actually something, unlike all the other times. And Trump caught on pretty quick after that. Maybe a few days or a week later, he changed his tune. And that's good. So could he have reacted sooner? Yes. But considering the context of all the other viruses that were supposed to be something that weren't, this is probably a man-made virus. I posted a video on my Facebook page about this medical researcher, and he was talking about how this is like a Frankenstein virus. They took elements of SARS and HIV and the flu, and they put it all together, and you can see that in the gene sequencing. You can see specific segments that were copy and pasted. I don't know how they did this, but were copy and pasted from HIV and from the flu and then some parts of SARS. And he's saying this is not naturally occurring. This doesn't happen in nature. I'll put the link in the description. But so this is probably a manufactured virus. And the medical researcher was saying they figured out how to program this virus to be able to infiltrate the cells and to program this virus to be contagious. So if Trump doesn't know that, then yes, maybe he wasn't expecting that. Who was expecting that? But she's expecting him to know that all ahead of time. 2020, she's expecting her 2020 hindsight to be his foresight in January. And by the way, he stopped travel from China. And he was called racist and xenophobic by media outlets. And Dr. Fauci said that helped a lot to slow down the virus, to help us get a head start. So he did that. Meanwhile, the Democrats' frontrunner, he said in January, that's xenophobic, that's fear-mongering, and that's hysterical. That's what Joe Biden said. You won't hear Rachel Maddow criticize him. And Joe Biden on the European ban, he still hasn't come around and supported the bans.
In terms of material, tangible promises, President Trump claimed that we'd have 1.4 million tests available this week. Of course, we've seen nowhere near that. We've done about a tenth of that.
Dr. Fauci even said, this is not Trump's fault. We ran into some technical problems at the CDC. Trump is not in there with the mask and the goggles, mixing up the test kits. This is not his job. He's taking their word for it. They're telling him this is the projections. And Dr. Fauci said there's nothing we could have done. It was just a technical problem. And I don't know the process, but I'm taking his word for it. There's just unforeseen things that came up that prevented us from making a test. And this is not Trump's fault at all. But she's blaming Trump. Now, what he did was say, okay, we need to make a lot of tests here. How can we get these tests out as fast as possible? And he saw, hey, look, these state labs and these private labs, they could be helping, but they're not because of these FDA regulations. So Trump went into action with the CDC and FDA and struck the deal to get the FDA to stop these regulations for this emergency period. To say you can make the test, you don't have to go through all these hoops that it's going to take a long time. We need these tests now. So now state and private labs are making them. So it's going to be a lot faster than it was.
Last week, Trump announced that Google was developing a website to help people decide if they needed testing and where they could go to get it. It was going to be very quickly done, he said, unlike websites of the past. Turns out, of course, that website is still in the early stages of development, and currently it's only being tested in one part of California, and it's not even really working just for that.
Trump said it's going to be quickly. That's kind of a relative term. I mean, quickly in terms of building a website, how long is that? Quick in terms of getting your pizza delivered is 30 minutes. Quick in terms of building a spaceship might take years. So it's a very relative term. It's relative to the task. So obviously he means quick in terms of how long it normally takes to build a website like this. She's acting like, oh, he says it's going to be quickly and the website's not up yet. Oh, that was a lie.
President Trump announced this week that the Navy was sending 2 medical ships, one to New York City, one to the West Coast, to help treat patients. He said those ships would be launched over the next week or so, depending on need. Wrong. That was also wrong. As NBC's Courtney Kuby puts it, quote, it's anybody's guess as to when those ships will come in. One of those ships is currently undergoing maintenance. It has no medical personnel on board. The other one is also undergoing maintenance, and it lacks a medical crew altogether. Remember, the president said it'll be there next week. It won't be there next week.
Yeah, I remember when you quoted him as saying a week or so, and then now you're saying, remember when he said it's going to be there next week? That's not what he said. He said a week or so. So anyway, if you're going to nitpick him, I'm going to nitpick you. That's not what he said. You just quoted him, and then you misquoted him in the same segment, in the same paragraph. And by the way, it's going to be there in mid-April. That's what the reports are. They had to clean the ships. They had to get it ready. It's going to be there in mid-April. So he says it's going to be a week or so, and it's going to be more like a month. Okay, this is big news. I'm sorry I said a week or so, and it turned out to be a month. Like, okay. I could have said a month. That would have been better. What am I going to do? What am I going to do with myself? I'm so upset.
He has said similar things about face masks and other protective equipment for health workers. He told a group of nurses this past week that the government had ordered 500 million N95 respirator masks. He declined to mention that order will take 18 months to fill, if we're lucky.
Well, you're declining to mention that this ordeal is probably going to last 18 months. That's what Dr. Fauci said in his report. We're going to need these masks over the next 18 months. We don't need all these masks day one. We're going to need them over the next 18 months. And it's not going to be like 18 months and then all these masks are delivered at once. That's not how it's going to be. Masks are going to be delivered over time. There's going to be masks made immediately and every month for 18 months. And the masks will be supplied as best as possible. They're working hard. The supply chain from China was cut off for the masks. So they're in a little bit of a bind here. And they're working as fast as they can.
Millions of masks. Don't worry. Oh, nurses, what are you worrying about? Millions of masks are coming. You just need to wait a year and a half before you might.
She worked herself up and she popped right there. Did you see that?
You just need to wait a year and a half before you might.
unless she was acting, which I don't say that's not possible. But she worked herself so much with all this hysteria that she got choked up. This is a problem. I mean, she's working herself up. She's working her audience up. And what she's saying wasn't even true.
I mean, there is a clear pattern here in this crisis of the president promising stuff that he knows America would love to hear, but it's not true.
No, it is true. See, look at what she did here. It is true. Everything he said is true. It's like if the Buccaneers said, we're going to sign Tom Brady to a contract in a week or so. And then it turns out, oh, well, it took a month for you to sign him. Would you say it's not true that they signed him? No, the time frame they gave was inaccurate. They told you a faster time frame than it was. But the main point is they signed him. So you can't say it's not true. And she's making it out like all these things are not true. All these things are true. She didn't point to one untrue thing. A week and a half, now it's actually going to take a month. And he says it's going to be quickly. And then she's taking that to mean tomorrow or next week. And it's actually going to be weeks or a month or a few months. And she's taking the mask situation incorrectly, saying we're going to produce all these masks by 18 months. And she's taking that to mean a bulk delivery of all the masks in 18 months. She got that one wrong, and then she got choked up about it.
And even stuff that he's saying that he will do, that the federal government will do, he's not doing.
Like what? Like what? You presented nothing. You presented no examples of that. If you had an example of that, you would have done it.
If it were up to me, and it's not, I would stop putting those briefings on live TV. Not out of spite.
Yes, out of spite.
If the president does end up saying anything true, you can run it as tape. But if he keeps lying like he has been every day on stuff this important, all of us should stop broadcasting it. Honestly, it's going to cost lives.
How? That's a question I want to ask her. How? But anyway, you see that attempt at the end. She wants to cut off the presidential's briefing about coronavirus, where he's telling people this is what we're doing, this is the plan, and he's telling them he's telling people best practices: wash your hands, social distancing. This is what we're gonna do. This is all helpful information to get everybody on the same page. Hopefully, would go a lot better if the media would not try to snipe at him at every turn over stupid things. You have all this negativity, nitpicking. It's not helpful for the goal of trying to stop coronavirus, of trying to get people cured, of trying to get vaccines out, of trying to stop the pandemic. It's not helpful at all. She wants to talk about it's going to cost people. These presidential briefings are going to cost people's lives? What are you talking about? This was an absurd segment. And I don't watch Rachel Maddow often, but I watch her Facebook feed, and it's constant negativity about everything. Just negativity. And then I'll click on an article. I'm like, okay, that was a clickbait headline. That wasn't exactly what they said. And this is extreme nitpicking, or this is taking something out of context. It's just constant. It's like the energy of vomit, honestly. It's so disgusting. But anyway, like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video.